also an ex-naval officer and a doctor, a surgeon. He was with the Navy, and he resigned, and subsequently he's been practicing privately in Pune, and is also pursuing his passion of writing history books. Now let's move on to the topic. The the topic, as you all know, is the Maratha Century, and we are specifically talking about the 18th century, and I think we'll go into some part of the 17th century as well, because I think the story begins from there. And this is an extremely fascinating period of Indian history where there was a central authority that was weakening. There were other players that were coming into the scene. There is flux, chaos, and from that rises one more power, which Dr. Kulkarni will talk about. How that happened, who were the main players in that, what were the processes, and what happened towards the end of that is something he will touch upon during the course of our conversation. So, Dr. Kulkarni, the first thing I would like to ask you to explain to our audience, talk about, is the topic. If you could explain, why do you call this the Maratha Century?
Just a few introductory words before that is that just this morning in the first session in the Antarang, there was a quote from Bhattihari which said that if a person doesn't read art, doesn't understand music and read literature, then he's an animal without horns. So I think history falls under the arts, and I congratulate all of you for being here this afternoon in this wonderful place, beautiful ambience. And I recently, in fact, visited an opium farm in Mandsaur, and to the original quote of religion being the opium of the masses, I was suddenly felt like I should also add something to that, and which is history is the opium of the classes. Because only when your physiological needs are met, food, clothing, shelter, that you start thinking of other things, where I came from, philosophy, history, all these things start coming to you. So I think history has probably come of age now, because India is at a stage with about 300 million, 400 million in middle class. So that is a time when I think history is something being sought after and being read by many people. Coming to your question, the phrase Maratha Century I coined a few years back, because the conventional wisdom, as I call it, is that there was a Mughal Empire and that gave way to the British, which is actually not the right narrative, because for nearly 150 years, right from the latter half of the 17th century till the early 19th century, there is a power which touched upon almost every part of India, and that part was that of the Marathas. We have a very Delhi-centric history, and we read about people who ruled in Delhi. But for a very short time in our history, you find that the ruler of Delhi actually ruled over the entire country. Not more than 20 years. No ruler ruled for more than 20 years throughout India's history until we come to the British and independent India. So I would like to take this message across that the Marathas actually came between the Mughals and the British period. And there is another thing about the Marathas period, is that this was not just a political change. It was also a cultural change, because it was a kind of a cultural renaissance which took place all over the country. And what had been undone in the previous 4 centuries was kind of redone again. And for example, if you go to a place like Kashi today, scarcely you'll find a building which was built before the 17th or the 18th century. And we have letters which say that right from 1730s, during Bajirao Peshwa's time, money was being sent to Kashi to rebuild temples, build the new ghats, and therefore if you go to Kashi, you find the Sandhya Ghat, the Bhosle Ghat, the Raja Ghat. So all these things were built at Ahilya Devi Holkar, who's from Malwa, built the temple afterwards of Kashi Vishwanath, and even the Dashashwamedh Ghat, if you go and see, it was actually built by Nana Sahib Peshwa, and later on again repaired by Ahilya Devi. So these are all things which they not only fought for the political freedom of India, but they also tried to, there's a letter by Chhatrapati Sambhaji, son of Shivaji, who says the Hindu Rashtra Zahale. He says it in very explicit quote in his letter. So the aim of the Marathas was not just political independence, but they also wanted to usher in a rule by the indigenous people. So as I always say, that the Maratha period was the first indigenous empire after several centuries of Turco-Persian rule, as it is called. And it was also the last indigenous empire before we were taken over by the British. So this 150 years in our history, you may not see fantastic monuments all over the world, which are usually kind of one relates to as a powerful emperor of that time, because they never built those kind of magnificent monuments. So, but they were there, and they made a big change, and much of what we are today was because of that Maratha century, which happened in the 17th and the 18th century. Now, the first book I wrote was in 2011, which was on the Battle of Panipat. And 7 more books have followed. And the last one was, the recent book is before us right now, is Raghoba, the assassination of Narayana Rao Peshwa. Now, when I say Raghoba, I get a lot of blank stares because nobody knows who's Raghoba. But in the latter part of the 18th century, he was probably the most important person who molded the history of the times in his own ways. He was the man, for example, who led Maratha armies to Attock. Attock, Peshawar, Multan and Lahore, 4 cities were under Maratha occupation for nothing less than 18 long years, 18 long months. So this kind of history is not known. And this man Raghoba, in his quest to become the Peshwa, he assassinates his nephew in 1773. And therein the kind of gradual fall of the empire begins from that point in time. So that book actually deals with that very short 22-23 month period, which is what is described in this last book of mine.
So, since you've just touched upon the book, and the book is about 2 personalities mentioned on the cover itself who served as Peshwa, can you please tell us how did this office of the Peshwa come about? What was the relationship between the Peshwa, the later Peshwas, and the Chhatrapati? And how and when does this position, which loosely translates as Prime Minister, become hereditary? And what is the impact of that? It's a slightly longish question, but you can...
So going back right from the beginning, if you say Chhatrapati Shivaji, he was the man who founded the Maratha kingdom against great odds, and he appointed Peshwas. His officers were not necessarily hereditary, because you have 3 names as a Peshwa and they are not from the same family. So he appointed people who were chosen for that post, who were most appropriate for the post. In the latter part, after his son was, especially after Chhatrapati Sambhaji, his son was captured and killed in Aurangzeb's time, you find that the original constitution of the Maratha Empire, as laid down by Chhatrapati Shivaji, a centrally administered, ruled by the king, it kind of was in the 25-year-long war which the Marathas fought with Aurangzeb in the Deccan until he died there eventually. He left Delhi in 1781 and he never went back there. 1681 never went back there. He died in Ahmednagar. And during that time, the entire land of the Maharashtra region was completely ravaged. Hundreds and thousands of people were killed during that time. So that was a time when this system which had been set by Chhatrapati Shivaji actually went out of vogue. And a hereditary principle began to come into play. And Chhatrapati Shahu, who was the grandson of Shivaji, who came back from the Mughals after being in prison for 18 long years, he specifically believed that a particular family, once it is given a post, it should not be taken away from that family. So it continued from father to son and his grandson. So you will find the Peshwas became the prime ministers of the Maratha kingdom, all of them, before their 20th birthday. And they all died, except for the last one, before they turned 40. So just everybody was not very long-lived like Aurangzeb or Akbar. And that, of course, explains a lot. At the same time, a British commentator called Richard Temple, you find him writing that in no other empire, except the Mughals, the 4 Mughals, Akbar and Jahangir and Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb, do you find 4 consequential rulers, as you find in the first 4 Peshwas, till the death of Madhav Rao in 1772. So that is a comparison which he does with that as administrators. So it's very rare for a single family to have a 5th generation of an able person, if you go by the hereditary principle. But of course, we have not yet abandoned the hereditary principle in our public life.
Also there. So the Marathas were, among their other cultural accomplishments apart, they were considered great generals on the field. So who, in your opinion, was the greatest Maratha general? Was it Mahadji? Was it one of the Peshwas, Bajirao I? or you have another name?
If you want to estimate somebody who's the best general, I would say the person who met the maximum opposition at any given time. He has to be credited with the greatest amount of being a great general, and that credit cannot be taken away from Chhatrapati Shivaji, because the kind of opposition which he faced, the very strong Bahmani forces in Bijapur and Golconda in the south, a very strong Mughal power at its peak at that time. And against these kind of odds, you find a person sandwiched between these powers, still aspiring to form his own kingdom and managing to do it and coronating himself as king. There's no question of anybody coming close to him. And you have to judge a person according to the opposition. So in the 18th century, you find the Mughals were kind of dissipated. They were weak, and they became kind of supplicants to the Maratha rulers. And at one point in time in 1752, actually the Mughal emperor signs a treaty with the Marathas that you protect us from all our internal and external enemies. And in exchange for that, I will give you the following subhas, I'll give you so much money and so on.
Like the Rohilas, I mean, Mahatji defended Delhi. So, something associated with that is that while the Marathas were controlling who sat on the throne in Delhi, they deposed rulers, why did they never ever decide to sit on that throne themselves?
There's an impression that Delhi must always be the capital of India. That's one thing. But to rule from a particular city, you must be present there in sufficient force. Your power center is not Delhi. The power center of the Marathas will lay in the south, in Pune, Satara, those regions. For a king to supplant, go to the north and start ruling, it would be something like a Muhammad Tughlaq kind of thing, that he brought the whole city from Delhi to Daulatabad only to go back. So, and it was easier, the later Mughal emperors were so weak that it was easier to manipulate them, allow them to reign while the Marathas ruled. So that pattern was continued by the British later on after 1803 when they took over Delhi, and they took over Delhi again from the Marathas. So that was probably an easier pattern to continue. And Chhatrapati Shivaji's grandson, when Nadir Shah came and attacked Delhi, there was a move that why doesn't Chhatrapati Shahu go to Delhi and anoint himself as the emperor there? The Peshwa couldn't have done it because he was ultimately the prime minister. So, but Shahu specifically says, and there's a letter written by him which I will kind of paraphrase, and where he says that I find it a greater merit in repairing a broken down house rather than building a new one, in which he tries to imply that Muhammad Shah has been restored his throne when Nadir Shah went back, and I will continue to support him in that role, and we will continue to behave as the Amirul Umrah of the empire. So that was the directive given by him, and he lived till 1749, December 1749. So that tradition continued after that. There's no way they could control Delhi. They were like Mahatji Sindhe's base was practically at Mathura. He was there all the time there. He was within striking distance of Delhi. But he didn't himself go in Delhi. He used to always, his son-in-law used to be in charge of Delhi, some other Sardar used to be in charge of Delhi. But he stayed at a safe distance from Delhi, able to control. The threat was there that he's close by. But he was not there in the center of power where somebody could attack him.
So the Peshwas were Brahmins, and they are probably one of the few examples in Indian history where a Brahmin was leading in the battlefield. So how was that seen in the orthodoxy? Because these are duties which are not really part of a Brahmin's duties, and they were also exercising power to a way greater extent than even the ruler.
It didn't happen overnight. It happened in a very insidious fashion. Moropan Pingle, for example, was the Peshwa of Chhatrapati Shivaji. And you find Moropan Pingle leading armies into battle several times. In fact, in his time, Moropan Pingle was a very important prime minister, general. So that kind of role he fulfilled to a very large extent. And later on, when there was a Senapati, of course, there was a general who was appointed as a Senapati. But as with this feudal system, the generations, his fathers gives way to the son. The son was not always as efficient as the father and did not execute the role of a Senapati as well as his father did. So over a period of time, especially during Bajirau's time, Bajirao was a very brash, ambitious, most un-Brahmin-like character. So, I mean, Bajirao at his time was ostracized by the Pune Brahmins because not only did he drink, he ate chicken, and he also had a Muslim kanchini whom he practically married. So these are all things which were not accepted by them, and there was a social boycott. Now today he is kind of considered one of owned by them, but that particular time in history he was ostracized for his actions.
He was one of the most powerful Peshwas.
Yes, so he was a very brash young man, and probably the amount of campaigns he has led and the amount of kilometers and miles he used to travel in a day was amazing. And unfortunately, the movie Bajirao Mastani doesn't do any justice to this man, because I only wish somebody had told the director that Bajirao took Mastani to Delhi when he attacked Delhi in 1737, and we would have probably got one more insight into his military tactics. And he remained undefeated in those for 20 years that he fought, that he remained the Peshwa. And for that, the credit goes to his thinking. I mean, he did not take on a fight which he could not win. He chose the battleground. He chose the timing of the battle, and if he found that the timing is not right and the battlefield is not right, he didn't fight. You will find only one battle of the Peshwa is a frontal battle, and that is paradoxically, ironically, is with the Senapati of the Maratha Empire, who did not like that Bajirao was taking over his role. And not only that, he took away half of Gujarat from him, because the Peshwa's aim was such that in every part of every province of the Maratha Empire, there must be a small part which is with the Peshwa. So he took away half of Gujarat, and which was resented by the Senapati at that time. Now where the Senapati erred is that he took the help of foreign powers. He called the Nizam to his help. He called Muhammad Khan Bangash from Allahabad for his help. So when he did that, he was committing kind of a treason. So when Bajirao was in Gujarat, this huge army was heading to block his way back to Pune. So Bajirao preemptively attacked Dabade, and there's a wonderful, I mean, total war, what we describe as total war, which created a battlefield where every kind of, whether it's rockets, whether it's cannons, whether it's bows and arrows, they all fired simultaneously in a large body of men. So that was a different, unique style of fighting in that battle, where the Senapati was killed. And then Bajirao had to go to Satara, apologize to the Chhatrapati that this was not a battle which was caused by my acts. He blocked my way. My requesting him to give way did not, and in the heat of battle, anything can happen. So that was the only frontal battle. Otherwise, Bajirao's victories you find are mostly bloodless. He defeated the Nizam, who was the most powerful ruler, Sardar of the Mughals in 1728 at Palkhed, cut him off from food and water for 3 days, and he came to his knees, surrendered. 1738, he did the same thing on the outskirts of Bhopal. The Nizam was coming from Delhi with a huge army southwards to punish Bajirao. Bajirao came north. He told his brother to block the way for Nasir Jung, who was Nizam's son in Hyderabad, from him coming north. And when the Nizam, probably having memories of his defeat in 1728, when he came near Bhopal, he entered the walled city and stayed put. So Bajirao writes to his brother, "I'm astonished that this great general, why he has gone and taken shelter in Bhopal. He thought there's plenty of water here, at least I won't be starved out." But he was starved out because the food was getting exhausted.
Is this the same battle in which Jagua and Kachua, there were two Gwalior generals who were camping outside Bhopal?
He tried to make a breakout. So that breakout, he went up to Doraha, which is about a few kilometers from here, using his artillery to blast his way through. I don't know the names of the generals.
So there is this legend in Bhopal about Bhopal being under siege. And it was actually the ladies, the women in Bhopal, who broke that siege. This was at the Fatehgarh Fort, which is very close to where we are. And like you said, while the fort was under siege, there was no food, water inside. And the ladies carried a lot of stuff, swam across the lake and relieved Bhopal.
I'm not aware because there's no document supporting that.
Local Bhopali.
But eventually he had to sign a treaty which was of the most humiliating terms. He not only promised Bajirao that from the emperor, I will get the reward of Malwa given to you. I will give you 15 lakh rupees as compensation. And after that, the Nizam went back to Delhi and did not come to the Deccan till Bajirao was alive.
Okay. Sir, you have a background from the Indian Navy. The Marathas were one of the few dynasties from India, or the rulers from India, who had a maritime tradition and a navy. And they were expanding in the mainland. Why did this thought of not expanding through the sea occur, or was it attempted and did it fail? And that is how all great powers in the world in those days were expanding.
Basically, the very idea of having a navy for a land-based power based in the interiors like Pune, when Chhatrapati Shivaji decided that in 1758, I will establish a navy. That itself was a visionary act. Very rarely you find such kind of acts in the history of India. And because he didn't have the technology at that time, he took the help of a father and son, a Portuguese father and son called Vagarth, along with 20 other Portuguese men who helped him to build the first 20 ships. And then the Portuguese government called them back that please don't help these people to make any more ships. And by that time he had managed to learn the technology of building ships. So I often cite it as the first transfer of foreign technology of how to build a ship here. So that was the first beginning. And the Maratha Navy, see the English literature, if you find, is full of calling Kanoji Angre a pirate. Now the very definition of a pirate is a man who's acting on his own authority for his own profit, not if he's obeying orders of a king. Even in the 20th century, the definition of pirate is acting on his own account.
Same freedom fighter versus pirate.
Kanoji Angre was appointed the admiral of the Maratha Navy by the king. So he could not have been labeled a pirate. In fact, on the other hand, the Portuguese and the English were kind of demanding that if you want to ply your ships on the sea, you must take a passport from us for that. So that passport, or as the Portuguese called the cartes, which was refused by the Marathas. This is our coastline. You can't demand. In fact, they started demanding a passport from these powers that you get a passport from us. So the Maratha Navy, what happened is technologically, the 18th century, you find later part, at least the Industrial Revolution came up. The technology for manufacturing better guns came up. The technology, the know-how of how to fight battles at the sea were better acquired in Europe, which while we kind of stabilized on a certain level and did not really make technological improvements in our strategy, in our construction, in our weaponry, we didn't have that know-how at that time. So, and most of the time you find the battles of the 18th or the early 19th centuries were lost because of technology. I mean, the first boring machine, for example, just to give you an aside, was discovered in England in 1774 by Wilkinson. Now, John Wilkinson, when he made that boring machine, it was made for cannons, that you should have a smooth bore. So if you put a shell in it, it will just go straight and the cannon will not blow apart when it is fired because it's uneven or the shell is not of the right size. That boring machine was used to make the cylinders for the steam engine, and that set off the Industrial Revolution. So that technology we never had. We hammered metal pieces into place to make a gun, to make a shell. It probably sometimes was not of the right size. You find Raghoba in a battle in 1759 with the Nizam. There's a letter which he writes that they used to give all the cannons were having names. So he said there's a cannon called Lakshmi. Somebody came to see it the other day, and then it burst. The implication of that letter is that somebody came and did some witchcraft on that thing, and the next day it burst. So this technology was lacking even in the commanders. So in the lay people who are doing this job, they were just kind of imitating things. If they tried to buy cannons from the English, they probably got substandard cannons which were anyway of no use. So the foundries have been established from the time of Bajirao. In fact, the English Vakil who came to India, into Pune in 1739, he describes the foundries, that I found so many cohons being melted here. Mahadharao has got several examples of used alloy metal to do it. And in Mahaji's time, in the Second Anglo-Maratha War, it came to a stage with the help of the French engineers that the Scindia cannons were better than the cannons of the East India Company. In fact, they used to have an iron cylinder inside, covered by a brass kind of cover on it, so that they didn't explode, and they became lighter to carry. Others, to carry one heavy cannon, they used to require 20 bullocks. So because of brass, the weight of the cannon went down, they could carry it and they could fire it accurately.
So you mentioned Mahaji, Scindia. Let me try and localize you to where we are, to Madhya Pradesh. Some of the question later. So some of the prominent ruling families in Madhya Pradesh are from a Maratha background, Gwalior, Indore, and there are more. But how did these states come about, and what was their relationship with the Peshwa at that time?
When Bajirao became the Peshwa, he was 19 years of age. Now, Chhatrapati Shivaji had a system of 8 Ashtapradhan Mandal, or cabinet of 8 ministers. And when Bajirao at the age of 19 became the Peshwa, these old timers, the old guard, they refused to support him. When they refused to support him, he made his own commanders. So the people he selected were the Mallara Holkar, Ranoji Shinde. They were all selected by Bajirao and they joined his service. who were completely loyal to him. And in 1735 onwards, when he began to fight for the possession of Malwa, now I must add a note about the importance of Malwa in India's geography, that this is the only province which connected North India with South. Because to the east of it was all jungles, and beyond that, if you had to go, you had to go via Bengal, Orissa, again jungles in between. So this was the only channel to come from Hindustan to the Deccan. You had to pass through Malwa. So whoever possessed Malwa had a kind of a very, very decisive role whether he could go north or south. Therefore, the first invasions into Malwa began in 1707. 1729, Malwa, actually the battle near Amjera, near Dhar, where the Mughal governor was killed by Bajirao's brother in a frontal battle. And from that time, you can say de facto, the Maratha rule began here. Now, earlier the system was that after the end of the season, which was in the month of May, before the monsoons came, all the Maratha army withdrew into Maharashtra. In 1735, you find for the first time, because he was bidding for Malwa, that Bajirao tells Scindia, Ranoji Scindia and Mallara Holkar that this year, please canton in Malwa. Stay put there. So, Scindia was posted in Ujjain while Mallara was in Indore. And of course, Gwalior became a capital of Scindias much later. So, Ujjain which began. So, from that year onwards, the Scindias and Holkars continued to stay here. And that's how they spread their wings in this region.
Okay. And another topic which is quite discussed in Madhya Pradesh is the events of 1857 vis-a-vis the Scindias. So what is your view on that? So what happened in that Gwalior, Jhansi, East India Company issue?
Now, without trying to rewrite what is already written and which is documented from whatever documents are available in the National Archives, there are certain things which are not stated, which cannot be proved by documentation. So, like there's a very important person in Scindia's household at that time who was his diwan. He was Dinkarao Rajwade. Now, the Scindia who was ruling at that time was a young boy, a 14 or 15-year-old boy, and his prime minister Dinkarao Rajwade took all the decisions. So, it is said, I will say that there is no document to substantiate this, that a strong fort like Gwalior could not have been captured by a ragtag army led by Rani Lakshmi Bai and Tatya Tope without some kind of support from the Scindias. So Dinkara Rajwade advised, this is again as I said undocumented, advised that his ruler that you please flee north to Agra while the fort was handed over to Lakshmi Bai, and and his army also defected. Now, what is written in documents is the army defected to Lakshmi Bai. But whether they defected or he ordered them, then Rajwade ordered them to go, we don't know. But it was Rajwade's initiative that time that saved the Scindias and have brought them to where they are today.
Correct. So let's come back to the book a little bit and the events around it. You touched upon Raghunath Rao as being one of the most interesting characters who was in, when the Maratha Empire territory-wise was at its zenith, he was there. He comes across as a very complicated, complex sort of character in history. So can you please tell us a little bit about him? And he's not talked about much, but he has a very important role in Maratha history. So what were these complexities? Was he driven by personal ambition? And just for the audience, basically what had happened was that his Raghunath Rao's nephew had been appointed the Peshwa, which did not go down very well with him. And the book is basically about the assassination of Narayan Rao Peshwa and the role of his uncle and his wife in making that happen.
So Raghunath Rao actually is a good case study for any psychoanalyst, if you ask me. Because he was the second surviving son of Bajirao. But Bajirao died when Raghunath Rao was hardly 4 or 5 years of age. So for all practical purposes, his elder brother, who was a good 12 or 13 years older than him, was Nana Sahib Peshwa, and he was like a guardian for him. So as long as Nana Sahib was alive, which was till 1761, 6 months after the Battle of Panipat, whatever Raghunath Rao did, if he came back from a campaign with huge debts, was covered up by his brother. And nor did at that time Raghunath Rao make his ambition be known, because it was very clear that he could not have supplanted his brother as the Peshwa. But in Panipat, suddenly the first three people who were claimants for the line of the Peshwa, is Nana Sahib died few months later. His eldest son, who was designated as the next Peshwa, he died at Panipat. His cousin, yes, his cousin Sadashivara Bhau was killed there. And suddenly you find that Raghoba or Raghunath Rao has suddenly got promoted to become the senior most age-wise person in the Peshwa household. Now, considering that the system at that time was hereditary and he was the senior most person, but there was people in the know who were in the court had seen the kind of inefficiencies which Raghunath Rao was used to, and the way he functioned on his campaigns. He came back from Attock with a loan of debt of 80 lakh rupees, which was a huge sum in those days. So he was reprimanded for that by Sadashivara Bhau, that you can't go to the campaign and come back with a huge loan like this. So, but after Panipat, he suddenly found that the next boy, the second son of Nana Sahib, was only 16, and he was to be the next Peshwa, because the next Peshwa automatically was the son of the person who was dead, and he initially took over the role of the regent to that young boy, but which was resented by Nana Sahib's wife, or the Peshwa's mother. So there were two camps which formed in the Maratha court, one which favored Madhav Rao and his mother, and the other which favored Raghoba. And try as much as he could to win over the mother, she would not be won over, and she said that my son must get his right. Now eventually what happened is a battle with the Nizam in 1763, in which Madhav Rao, though he was a kind of a semi-prisoner in Raghoba's, he acquitted himself extremely well. In fact, Raghoba was surrounded, was about to be captured, and Madhav Rao sent people to rescue him from that predicament. And that was the time when Madhav Rao practically took over. But Raghoba kept asking for a division of the kingdom, that give me half the kingdom, give me 15 lakh rupees worth of estate, give me so many forts. And Madhav Rao replied to him, this is not my kingdom, whose kingdom is this? So he behaved as a trustee of the kingdom. He said, I cannot split the kingdom and give half of the kingdom to you. And eventually Raghoba became so possessed that he had to become the Peshwa, that he rose in rebellion with an army. So Madhav Rao had to go and fight a battle with him near Nasik, captured him and put him in prison. This was in 1768. Madhav Rao that time was just 25 years of age. There was no reason to expect that this man would not live for another 50 years, and Indian history would probably had gone in a different direction had he done that. But within a year or so, he developed tuberculosis, and before his 28th birthday, you find Madhav Rao is dead. And this man actually, all that was lost in Panipat recovered. Delhi was taken back in 1771. The absentee Mughal emperor was sitting in Allahabad with the English, brought back as a token, put him back on the throne, and so many things were taken from him. So all these things he did. In the south, he defeated Hyder Ali almost 4 times in 4 campaigns. So he had practically regained what was lost at Panipat. But his early death, like one of the sayings are, the early death of this excellent prince was more fatal to the Maratha fortunes than even the fields of Panipat. So that is what actually was the legacy of Madhav Rao, and immediately he died. The next in line was a 17-year-old brother, Narayan Rao. Now Narayan Rao tried to act like his elder brother, like he used to command people. Madhav Rao has been known to cane people in the darbar if they disobeyed him. So he tried to behave in a very, but he didn't have the kind of the biodata was not supporting his behavior. He started behaving directly as a, so he put off a lot of senior ministers who were supposed to support him, and that led to, Raghoba was already in prison, so that led to a kind of a plot which began to form against him, which over a period of 7 to 8 or 9 months finally culminated in this disaster of assassination in his own palace. And that ended the Peshwai for all that matters. So in 1773, the Peshwa is assassinated. Posthumously, his wife gives birth to a child 7 months later, and that man, that young boy of 40 days is made the next Peshwa, and the ministers, Nana Fadnis and these people, they become the regents, and they decide that Raghoba is a culprit. He has done this, though he himself didn't do it with his own hands. So he must be hunted down, punished. It was a very strong moral stand which was taken, and that probably if he had not taken that stand, they said, okay, let Raghoba rule. again things would have settled down, but they said, no, this has never happened before. Even the Chhatrapati at that time, there's a letter in which says, ki this rule, this is a Rajya, is the Rajya of Dharma. And such kind of adharma will not be accepted here, and this man must be punished. So that set off a civil war to start with, and as you will read in the book, it eventually led to the first Anglo-Maratha war.
So Narayan Rao comes across as, I mean, for want of a better word, a soft person. I mean, there are numerous occasions when he's told by various people that your uncle is plotting against you, there is intrigue, there is this. He puts him in jail, but that is about it. And there are a series of negotiations. He allows him to come out, gives him luxuries, then stops those. And the final scene when he's actually killed is also when he runs to his uncle for help. So a little about Narayan Rao also. You touched upon him that he was, I mean, he was acting high-handed, but
Yes.
suddenly he becomes a soft person. Where
No, actually, from what we have documents of the time, you find that Raghoba's imprisonment during during Madhavrau's time, Madhavrau had that blow hot, blow cold, good cop, bad cop routine, by which he would go and ask his uncle for advice in prison, give him his dues, his importance, and so that kind of, not Jagir, but he used to make him happy. But Narayan Rao kind of not only stopped him from going out for his darshan of the sun every day, but he changed all his personal servants also. And he started fasting, that I am not allowed to go here. So he went on a fast for so many days, he didn't take any food. So he was much, I mean, his wife says that we have never been through such kind of, we have never been treated so badly before this. So he was a willing conspirator when the plot was presented to him, though he did not want to actually kill his nephew. I mean, that probably was done either by the Gardis or by an unstated person who gave the order, which we don't know.
So now a little about Anglo-Maratha relations, and I want to talk a little bit about one character from that time who I find very fascinating, and that is Arthur Wellesley, who, I mean, for those who don't know, he was also the brother of one of the governor generals of that time, born in a family in Ireland, one among the 8 or 9 siblings, goes to a fancy school of those times, which still is, Eton, and joins the army, comes to India, and it is said that he was one of the greatest generals ever seen. 60 odd battles which he never lost, or that is what is said about him. And he then is fighting the Marathas at one point of time, also responsible for taking down the Tipu Sultan's empire in the south, and then he goes on to Europe back again, where in 1857 as Duke of Wellington, 1815 as Duke of Wellington defeats Napoleon. That is not the end of his story. He becomes Prime Minister twice of England. So that is about Wellesley. And then what was his role in the Anglo-Maratha conflict, and how did that pan out?
See, Arthur Wellesley has been given a lot of credit in the Second Anglo-Maratha War for being a great general, but the major part of the work was done by Lord Lake. Lord Lake won 4 battles in North India: Agra, Aligarh, Delhi, Laswari. 4 battles were won by Lord Lake against stiff opposition from the Scindia forces, because the Second Anglo-Maratha War was principally a battle between the Scindia forces and Lord Lake. Arthur Wellington was a bit of a pampered young man. And in fact, in Tipu Sultan's time also, it was General Harris actually who was in the forefront. Arthur Wellesley was in the back. Again, he had his brother's support at several times. And Assai was the only battle which he fought here, which he says was he says that was the battle. I mean, I have not fought 2 horses shot under him, his aide-de-camp's next to him blown off. And that was one battle which was the toughest battle which he faced. And so his claim to fame for the Second Anglo-Maratha War is probably it should go to Lord Lake, who did all this. Now the reason the Second Anglo-Maratha War was lost by the Scindias was when Daulat Rao Scindia was the head of the Scindias, was that the Scindian forces were led by French commanders. In 1803, when the battle lines were drawn, Lord Lake made a proclamation on the 30th of August. He said by the 30th of August, all Europeans who are fighting in India, either they submit to us or they will be considered as rebels. Now all these European mercenaries or captains of the Sindhi army had acquired a huge amount of wealth during their stay here. And to take that wealth back to Europe, they were dependent either on Calcutta or Bombay. So when Lord Lake gave an ultimatum that you either surrender or be prepared to fight with us, by 30th September, everybody, including the CNC of the Scindia forces, who was General Perron, they all submitted to Lord Lake. The first battle at Aligarh of the Second Anglo-Maratha War, you find the Maratha commanders of Aligarh actually locking up the French commanders because they wanted to surrender to Lord Lake and continue the battle. So Arthur Wellesley, of course, in any battle, whether Napoleon lost or the commander who makes the fewest mistakes loses the battle. So that is an axiom, I would say.
You want to take over?
Yeah, we can have some questions.
Yeah.
Yes. So from the public, yes.
The 1837 Battle of Doraha, which is just about 15-20 kilometers, when the Maratha forces they had besieged the city, and Bhopal lost hugely. So my question is that Marathas had a huge presence, Nagpur and subsequently. Where can we find authoritative documents of Maratha presence, their battles and whatever it is relating to Madhya Pradesh or say Bhopal? To corroborate further, we have the archives in Bhopal, which begins from the period of because nobody is able to read it, it is in Persian, and that too they call Shikasta Persian. And there is not a single person in Bhopal who can read that. So the challenge is, if you look for Bhopal history, you will not find even one authoritative. This is a very strange thing that from 1707 till the year of the accession to India, there is no authoritative book on the history of Bhopal. The 250 years of such a huge vacuum. Whatever is there, it's in Shikasta Persian. And 1537, when the battle was won, where can one find, is it there in Deccan or somewhere in Deccan? That is number one. Yes.
The 1738 battle where the Nizam was defeated is available, copious documents in the Marathi letters of the time, Bajirau's own letters for that matter. He describes the battle in detail and what happened, how did he manage to get the Nizam to surrender and so on and so forth. So that is available quite freely. The English have written about it, though not in that much great detail. But I don't know about Shikasta because till 1835 there are a huge number of scholars who could read Shikasta. Now there are very few. There is a team in Pune which is building up on that. They have got some documents paying £3,000 to the Royal Asiatic Society, Aurangzeb's Farmans and so on, which are in Persian, which they are reading and translating, and those are going to be made public shortly. There are some people in Delhi who can read it. So it's surprising that though Bhopal was never captured and ruled by the Marathas, it always remained under the Nawab. Though he used to pay a tribute to the Marathas. I don't know why the Persian disappeared from Bhopal. It should have remained because of the royal family of Bhopal remained in continuous possession of this town throughout this period.
Anyway, it's not there in public domain, nobody is aware of it. The second thing is that Marathas from Mandsaur to Ratlam, Manasa and down to Sitamaho, Singrauli, Javra and that entire patch touching the southern part of Malwa. In the initial phases, our historical books and gazetteers are replete with instances of these initial rulers, not I won't say rulers, but they were the representatives of Maratha in Rampur of say Mandsaur or in Sitamaho or in Ratlam, who were going rampant on looting. And this loot had become a huge nuisance. It is all documented. why were these Marathas, Subedar or Jamidars, indulging in this loot for a very long period?
Uh, there are two, three. I'll give you an example. For example, in Jaipur, the succession of Jaipur in 1751, there were two claimants, Ishwari Singh and Madho Singh. Now, the Scindias took the side of one and the Holkars took the side of the other because they said they promised them payment. The Peshwa told the Scindia manager, please withdraw, and he withdrew, which left Holkar in the field. He defeated Ishwari Singh and put Madho Singh on the throne of Jaipur. Now, Madho Singh, before he became the king of Jaipur, he promised Holkar that I will give you so many parganas revenue for the next 36 years. I will give you so much for making me the king. Now, after doing that, Jaipur was a walled city at that time. Maratha troopers who went to see the new city, the gates were closed and about 1500 of them were slaughtered. The previous day, the Scindias, Holkars were called for dinner and they were to be poisoned. But they didn't go. So the question of getting this tribute which was promised and the gaddi which was given, which was obtained by on Maratha arms, strength of Maratha arms, it was never repaid. Second thing is the tradition of South. South was a system by which the British also did that. They gave a subsidiary army to the local princes and said, "Aap inki tankha do, and they will protect you, and you disband your army." That is the only thing the Marathas didn't do with these princes. They allowed them to keep their army. But they said, you don't have to look after your defense. We will not invade you, and we will not let anybody else invade you. But in lieu of this service, you must give us a chauth of your revenue. Now this chauth was never paid on time. So what is the executive power by which you can make somebody pay the chauth? That is the second thing. The third thing is the hordes of Pindaris, which were there attached to every army. Not only the Marathas, they were attached to Hyder Ali and Tipu's army. They are called Bayeds in the south. Now these Pindaris used to pay the chief for the right to plunder at the end of the battle. So very often the main Maratha force didn't do it. They just fought the battle, but after the enemy was defeated, the Pindari chief who had given money to the chief to actually be permitted to loot, they were doing this kind of looting.
Anyway, that was my next one, that the Pindaris means
Sir,
which continued.
We have
Last
some
one.
more questions. I would request, actually there are more people
We'll talk
waiting.
about
to,
it.
Okay.
Yes, you can meet sir outside. Thank you so much. The next question to be taken up, please. Yes, you can give it to him only if he wants to ask. Yes, this is the last question we are
Hi,
taking.
good afternoon everyone. Good afternoon, sir. My name is Ashish. I work for Radio Mirchi 98.3. Recently we have seen the trailer of Chhawa movie based upon the life of Chhatrapati Shambhaji Maharaj, which is about to come on like 10 or 15 days from now. Over the years we have seen movies like Bajirao Mastani, Panipat, Tanaji as well, which have depicted the Maratha folklore in a very, what should I say, sometimes in a very demeaning and sometimes in a very non-fiction or a fictional manner. According to you as an author, since you are an author and you have studied the Maratha culture over a long period of time, according to you, what really as an audience should keep in mind before watching these movies? How much is a fiction, how much is a non-fiction, how much is actually the historical content based upon in these movies? Because over the years we have seen so many controversies regarding these movies, especially when it comes to the Maratha movies based upon the life of these soldiers or Chhatrapatis and etc. So what according to you as an audience or a viewer should look into it?
I think the viewer should look upon it as pure entertainment and not history. Because it is not history to start with. All the serials which you see on TV are also not history. I'll give you a simple example. In the late or the early 20th century, there was a novel written by an author called Hari Narayan Apte. He wrote a novel called Gad Alap and Simhagila. Means the fort has come but the lion is lost. And that was describing the capture of Simhagad by Tanaji Malusre. Now since then people have started saying that the name of Simhagad is given because Tanaji captured it, which is not the case. Simhagad was called Simhagad even before that, and there are letters to authenticate that much before Simhagad became known as Tanaji's capture, the name Simhagad was there. But if you try telling this to people today, they won't believe you. They'll say, "Oh, kuch bhi bol raha hai." Because that is the effect that historical fiction has on the minds of people. First thing, its reach is much more than non-fiction, and it's presented in a way which is very kind of takes you in. So that is the problem with historical fiction. That's why I kind of steer clear of it.
Are there more questions or?
This is the last question, and after this, there will be one question for all the public. That will be the MCQ. This is the last question to be taken. Thank you.
सर मंसूर ग्वालियर और मराठों का हिस्ट्री में ये था कि आपको होलकर्स को पैसा चाहिए था, तो ग्वालियर ने मंसूर जो था फोर्ड उनके पास और वहाँ के रूरल थे, उन्होंने कहा कि ठीक है हमारे पास अब भी नहीं है, आप मंसूर को लूट के या वहाँ से कलेक्ट करके ले लीजिए। होलकर्स ने कहा था कि हमें पैसा दीजिए, मंसूर के लोगों ने मना कर दिया। तो 11 गेट थे मंसूर के, उन्होंने उनको बंद किया 11 गेट्स को, और जितने पैसे वाले थे उनको कलेक्ट किया एंड सिर्फ लेडीज के ऊपर ये नथ रखा और सारा पैसा लिया था। ये सही है?
आई डोंट नो, आपका सोर्स मुझे पता नहीं है क्या है।
मैं आपको रिटर्न की हैंड रिटर्न बुक देता हूँ 200 years old, आपको चाहिए तो वो देख लीजिए।
बिल्कुल।
नंबर 1। नंबर 2, क्या जागीरी और राजाओं की प्रथा रही है कि बड़े राजे को राजा बनाया, छोटे को राजा बनाया? जागीरी में भी ऐसा, तो ऐसा कोई हिस्ट्री में आपकी जानकारी में है?
जागीर के बारे में?
जागीर है, मराठा जागीर, जो कि छोटे और बड़े 2 जागीरदार हुए थे।
कौन से जागीर की बात कर रहे हैं?
मैं आपको बताता हूँ, रतलाम डिस्ट्रिक्ट में रिंगनोद करके एक स्टेट है, वहाँ पिंडाराज और सब थे, उसके सराउंडिंग ग्वालियर, होलकर्स, रतलाम, सीतामऊ, जावरा नवाब सब कुछ थे, वो सब परेशान थे। उन लोगों ने अपने विलेजेस वहाँ निकाले थे और विलेजेस पे कब्जा उन लोगों ने किया था। जो 6 ब्रदर थे, 4 डाई हुए थे, 2 बच्चे थे। उन्हें कहा नहीं, ये छोटे को आप जागीर दीजिए। उन्हें कहा नहीं, रूल है बड़े को दीजिए। बड़े को नहीं दी थी, छोटे, और फिर विद्रोह हुआ था। अल्टीमेटली उन्हें छोटा और बड़ा 2 पाती करना पड़े। 2 जागीरदार है, बड़ी जागीरदार, छोटी जागीरदार।
This happens.
तो इसका हिस्ट्री
इनफैक्ट यही
वही पवार
जयपुर में यही हुआ था ना, कि जब ईश्वरी सिंह had laid claim to the
ये
this thing.
600 years old से चला आ रहा था वहाँ
Yes.
का पैटर्न। फिर उनने गुजरात की वाइट के अंदर पवार्स के साथ हुए, और पवार
कई
को उन्होंने
incidents
कहा
होंगे ऐसे, but-
कि आप बड़े और छोटे राजा।
Thank you so
What
much,
was the
sir.
question? I
Okay.
don't know.
Okay, it's okay. Acha. So should we move further then? So we have a MCQ question for the public, and you have to raise your hand if you know the answer. Please avoid to say the answer beforehand. The moderator will decide who has to answer the question. So sir, please have a look to the audience. The question is quite simple. The third battle of Panipat, which was 1761, was fought between the Marathas and dash. So whoever knows the answer, yes, you both can, but we have someone from the audience, so yes, sir, you can. Sir, we need. No,
Third battle of Panipat.
yes, we are talking about third battle. The empire's name. Mm,
1761.
I
Abdali is right.
Abdali is right. Okay.
Durrani, you can say
Yes, the Durrani Empire.
Durrani is another name for Abdali.
Okay, maybe I am mistaken. Okay, so you can come on the stage, sir.
Durrani is a title taken by Abdali.
Okay, so congratulations. This is a book. So the book which is given is Live an Enriched Life, and I hope you live one. So, and now we move on towards the ending of the session. And as we conclude, I would like to request Reema Ahuja ji and Brigadier Sanjay Agrawal ji to please